Okay, well it's 1 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to implementing BePress's Digital Commons Institutional Repository Solution. I'm two views from the trenches. I am Carol Watson. I'm from the University of Georgia, along with my colleague James Donovan. And we will present one view from the trenches from the University of Georgia's viewpoint. And joining us on the discussion, our panel, will be Pamela Blue from the University of Maryland, who will give you sort of the experiences that the University of Maryland has had with the product as well. Before we get started, let me just sort of make sure we're all on the same page and that we all agree on what an institutional repository is and what the goals of the repository are. Quite simply, an IR is a means to collect the intellectual digital output of an organization. And you can see here the primary goals of the institutional repository are to collect the output into one virtual location. And we include a variety of formats. Some people think that it's limited to just text, but it can be audio, it can be video, it can be whatever kind of digital format that you can imagine you can include in the institutional repository. And of course, it also provides open access to materials, and you've probably seen lots of literature about open access and the principles of open access and why you would want to not have barriers or subscription barriers to your materials. And then finally and foremost, one of the primary goals of the institutional repository is to increase an institution's visibility or stature in the world or on the web. Both UGA and the University of Maryland chose Digital Commons as our platform for our institutional repository. And this presentation is going to be based on our personal experiences with the product. But I think that our broad generalizations and the problems that we encounter could be applied to any of the repository products, whether you were using an open access one or one that you've invented yourself or whatever. So the major topics that we plan to talk about are making the decision to implement an IR, how do you persuade your law school administrators to get on board with the project? How do you get buy-in from your faculty members and obtain content? Managing copyright, which is a huge issue in itself. And then we're going to go a little bit beyond the institutional repository and maybe talk about consortium agreements or selected works and whatnot. And Pamela's going to get into that in a few minutes. One more word about terminology. Sometimes you'll hear me say digital commons, sometimes you'll hear me say institutional repository, sometimes you'll hear us say IR. We're using all those terms interchangeably to refer to the institutional repository. So we're going to begin by having James Donovan start talking about how to persuade your administration that this is a good idea.
Cool. Okay, the first thing, basically the approach I'm taking here is very pragmatic and practical. What did we have to do to persuade our administration that the investment, both in terms of just the cost, the actual cost, and in terms of the staff costs of working on an institutional repository was worth the investment to do, to accomplish this project. How would an institutional repository advance the law school's goals as they saw it? We were coming at it from the perspective of librarians. We see kind of the intrinsic, the inherent value of an institutional repository. The administration looks at things differently, and they want to know, well, what's going to be kind of the tangible, immediate feedback for an institutional repository that will make it worth our time. From our perspective, the question was phrased in terms of SSRN. There's SSRN out there, not a cheap thing to do, but frankly, it's less expensive than an institutional repository. Can't we just do SSRN? We had to convince them why that may, why that wouldn't be the case, why SSRN was not just a cheaper way to accomplish the ends that an institutional repository would get for you. In order to couch that argument, we identified three considerations that needed to play into the calculus of what needed to be done. The first is the level of promotion. What unit benefits from SSRN versus the institutional repository? In our analysis, we decided that SSRN is really quite good at promoting the individual. Where Digital Commons promotes with more emphasis upon the institution. One way to arrive at that conclusion is that you cannot just go into SSRN and do an institutional search. You can't say, I want to see what all the papers are by University of Georgia. This is different from the University of Georgia paper series. We do have a paper series, but there are people at the University of Georgia who are not in our paper series. Me, for one. So people who are looking at the University of Georgia paper series wouldn't find my work because I'm not included within the law faculty paper series. However, the institutional repository, however, does let you see what is the institution putting out. So based upon that, you say SSRN pushes the individual, institutional repository pushes the institution. So they're distinguishable at that level. There's the depth of content. As Carol mentioned, the institutional repository, like Digital Commons, allows you to include a wide variety of file formats. SSRN, you just throw up the PDF paper and that's it. But we can put in PowerPoints, we can put in video text, we can put in all kinds of file formats that I know nothing about, but they're really way cool and that have nothing to do with SSRN. So there's just more versatility in the institutional repository than with the SSRN. The faculty, they understood SSRN, they understood that, so we're, again, trying to show them why SSRN is not the complete picture. There's also the issue of the search engine visibility. These are the answers to the question of, does Google see the content or just the metadata? And then where does Google, I always don't have to put that in quote, or any other search engine rank the results that it does find? Now, when we conducted our initial analysis, SSRN only allowed the search engine to look at metadata. It did not include searches that would require looking at the contents of the paper itself. It appears that SSRN has made improvements on that so that it does go beyond the metadata. But when we conducted our analysis, it was the case that SSRN was limited only to metadata, and Digital Commons, on the other hand, has worked especially hard, in fact, to make its contents more visible, and appear favorably to the search engine. So if the goal is to get your stuff out there, be seen by people who are searching through the search engine, there are differences there that need to be considered. Now, there's a combination through a combination of platform pushes, because both SSRN and BePress, push out content to people who, subscribe to receive it, but also through what people might find on the search engine. These are ways that the faculty authors connect with their readers. And so to the extent that the institution that's their goal. They want their faculty output to be grabbed by readers and receive notice and attention. The practical question is, which does a better job of that? We are able to make a direct comparison because papers are loaded, the same papers are loaded in both. So we compared some of my own papers, two of my own papers that we have loaded both in SSRN and in a companion product of Digital Commons Selected Works to see where it was taken up better. So these are the SSRN download statistics as of May 23rd. They showed that the first paper was downloaded 37 times, and the second paper was downloaded 47 times. Now, when you compare that with the Digital Commons Selected Works stats, the downloads for the paper that only got 37 downloads in SSRN got 353 downloads out of Selected Works. The second paper got 75 downloads out of Selected Works. It only got 47 downloads out of SSRN. Now, so we're getting that time point. Carol and I also did a white paper where we had these same stats for a different time period as of January. So when we actually graph these, what we get is something that's looking like this. It allowed us to kind of state with some kind of empirical conviction that as a general rule, Selected Works, things that are appearing in this BePress product is being downloaded far more frequently than something that's appearing in SSRN, even though the content is identically the same. And even though there's an argument that can be made that the SSRN is saturating its target audience. That's, a lot of people go to SSRNs, but there's this whole other universe that aren't looking at SSRN, and they go just through Google, and they're looking, and they find it that way. So you're getting this whole broader audience that the Digital Commons product is much better at grabbing than SSRN is. More equally interesting is it appears that whereas the SSRN hits, kind of go and just kind of start kind of leveling out, the Selected Works hits actually seem to increase over time. So the content in the Selected Works is actually becoming more popular, whereas the SSRN, it saturates its target audience and it kind of peters out. Because the universe of the target audience in the Selected Works is so much broader, that expands, that grows. Our conclusion then is that SSRN and Digital Commons are not redundant, that each is serving a different population of readers, and the SSRN favoring the law community of law scholars for Selected Works does a broader audience. And therefore, if the goal of the law school is to just really push its stuff out there, to get as much attention for its faculty scholarship as possible, you really need both. And once we made that argument to our administrators, there was really no argument that the institutional repository was fully in keeping with its long-term goal to increase the visibility of the law school. The institutional repository would be a key tool in maximizing that goal and achieving its success, and make the investment in it a foregone conclusion. Carol?
Okay. So you've convinced your administration to establish an institutional repository, and you've got everything all set up, and you're ready to get some content. The first thing you're going to need to do is build some buy-in, and you'll find right when you begin that your faculty will have a wide range of interest in the IR. You will have some that will have very little interest, and you're going to have to cajole and persuade to give you any kind of content at all. And then you're going to have the opposite end of the spectrum. You're going to have others who want to give you everything they've ever published, every letter to the editor they've ever written, their movie reviews, their short stories. It's a wide range of spectrum, and you're going to have to maybe dissuade them from being a little overeager. So the well-planned IR is going to have two tactics. One technique for persuading the contributors, and one to think a little bit about controlling the intake of unwanted content. So I'm going to focus first on the positive side, the getting of the content, how you would persuade people to contribute to the IR. So you're going to have to develop a strategy to promote the awareness of the repository. So the first thing we did was we set up various categories of materials. We have categories like scholarly works, presentations, working papers, library materials, and whatnot. So we set up all of our categories, and we populated each category with at least one item. And then we made sure that we had at least one item from every single faculty member in the repository. Didn't know what category they were in, we just made sure everybody had something included in the repository. Then we followed that time-honored technique of offering food to promote the rollout of the repository. So we had a wine and cheese reception. And so we invited the faculty all to come in and have a little wine and cheese. And we have you can see, we have a kiosk in the room, sort of a kiosk display. We had a kiosk going with sort of group presentations, and then we had laptops scattered around the room, and we had people with laptops sort of doing one-on-one and showing the faculty members. And they love seeing themselves. That's the first thing they do. They say, oh, look, we have your document here. And that worked beautifully. And they even came up with suggestions, oh, well, you should add my other document or whatnot. So we find that alcohol and a little food goes a long way toward promoting your project. The other thing we noticed was that ease of submission is critical. They don't want to take any time to think about how to do this. So you have two possibilities. With Digital Commons, you can have direct submission. You can have a link in the product, and faculty can upload their items, and there's an editor after the fact that can take a look at what they've done if you want to. And the faculty need never talk to a human. And this might work really well, probably, I think, better in a larger environment. We chose instead to do sort of a mediated submission. In other words, we're taking care of their faculty from beginning to end. We felt like we could give better service if we personally solicited the faculty. We could think about that content a little more that I mentioned before. And most importantly, which might surprise you, we find that faculty are often very unaware of their copyright permissions for their own publication. People are nodding, so this is not a surprise, but so to avoid any ethical and legal complications, we thought it might be best if we kind of took control of the copyright and made sure we had permissions before things got posted willy-nilly in our repository. The other thing you can do to build buy-in for your repository is give your faculty feedback. And the nice thing about Digital Commons is your faculty will get a monthly email report on their downloads. This is an example of one from the white paper that James and I promoted. And it's always nice, a little email hits your box. You go, oh, people are reading my stuff, and faculty love that kind of thing. Oh, they like to know that their stuff is out there. Another way you can persuade your faculty that this is a great idea is to remind them that online availability increases readership. Increased readership increases citation, and after all, that is the name of the game. There was a very popular article, you might have heard of it, that came out in Nature in 2001, Are You Online or Are You Invisible? And I've included, we'll post these slides in the CALI wiki, so you can come back and get the site for this document. But it definitely argues that articles freely available online are more often and more highly cited. So let's flip the coin for a minute and talk about the overzealous contributor, the person that wants to put their letters to the editor or whatnot in there. We came up with 3 possible solutions for that. And let me say before we start, you should probably decide what your policies for that are up front and make sure that you have buy-in from your highest appropriate administrator. We have a faculty development dean that we kind of discuss these policies with. And what we decided to do was, the first thing was we made sure our categories were very distinct, very specific. For example, we created a popular media category so that somebody that wants to put the letters to the editor in there or something that they wrote, you know, a little piece in Time magazine or something. It wasn't strictly legal, may not have even necessarily been academic, but we put it in that category so it didn't sort of overshadow the scholarship that was in the scholarly works category. Another thing we did was sometimes we would aggregate documents. We might make a record in Digital Commons that says newspaper editorials, and then we just attach all of them to a single record rather than putting in individual editorials as distinct records. And then the final thing we did was to encourage faculty members to set up selected works pages. And if you haven't taken a look at selected works, there was a little handout flyer in your bag, I think, that talked about the selected works product and gave you a guide for getting more information about that. And here's an example of one of the pages I've set up, but a faculty member can control their own uploading, and they can just upload to their heart's content. The beauty of selected works is it is tied in with Digital Commons, so we know if you've uploaded something in your selected works, we can say, add that to Digital Commons, because they're very integrated together. So it's a great way to sort of tie the two products together. So now I'm going to turn it back over to James to talk about that sticky problem of copyright and how to keep track of their permissions.
Yeah, copyright. As Carol says, do not rely upon your faculty's memories about what they signed away or what they retained in terms of permissions to post, especially for older materials where self-archiving wasn't even an option. So if they signed a publication agreement that did not expressly allow that as an option, then it's not safe to assume that they reserved that option and that therefore some kind of follow-up needs to be done. At the practical level, the way we have approached this is, first off, we assume we have permission from our own authors. We're not going to spend a lot of time trying to convince our own faculty to contribute toward their own institutional repository. Our attitude is if they want to make that argument, they can go make it to the dean who just wrote a big fat check for the institutional repository and tell them why they're not going to play well with others. But for our own self, we're going to assume we have our own faculty author permission, and therefore the only issue for us is getting the permission from outside our walls. When you're first setting up the institutional repository, you do have this incredible backlog. What we did is that we took the faculty bibliographies, we put them on a spreadsheet, sorted them by journal, so we could hit up the journal with a complete list of, here's everything our faculty has ever published that's ever appeared in your journal. Can we throw this up into not only into the Digital Commons, but also into the selected works? You want to make sure that you ask for both of those rights. Heretofore, we have not had anybody tell us no, which has been a good sign. If you ask them, we're finding people will tell you yes, and actually they're somewhat impressed that you're bothering to ask them at all, because I think often their own experience is that people are just posting things that they ought not onto the web, so they're kind of flattered and pleased that you're going to the trouble to talk to them and make sure you're doing it correctly. So you're asking for both of those permissions, giving them a complete list of exactly what articles you're asking for. When I send the request, I often will ask them, oh, and by the way, this is really kind of obnoxious for us all, so how about just giving us global permission to just kind of put up anything, in the past or in the future that our faculty might publish. We do have a significant list of journals who have granted us global permissions to include anything either prospectively or in the past that they have published. And this keeps us from having to go back to them with all this paperwork. So some journals are quite cooperative. Now, for the newer works, we have put on our faculty resources page an amendment to publication agreements that we ask them to include on whatever they're signing that would reserve for them these rights. This is something that we can go back to if, in fact, we're unable to get something negotiated with the journal, or if there's a problem. If, in fact, we know, and they do have now the paperwork, they have reserved these express rights. So there's sample language out there on the web, which is fairly easy to come by these days. The question is whether or not they're actually going to go to the trouble. We're finding younger faculty are more open to this. Older faculty, more set in their ways, probably are a bit more resistant to, or even aren't even thinking in these terms. And since we can't require that they do this, this is why actually our first line of just practical procedures to go to the publisher. But as a fallback position, would want them to be able to be including this amendment. So when all else fails, don't overlook the obvious. Look at the publisher's website to see if their publication agreement is included, or where they outline what rights they are reserving or granting to the author. It is possible that some of the faculty authors have retained their paperwork. I've never actually run across that. It is a logical possibility, but it is not a practical one. Also, Sherpa is a website that has kind of like collected publisher standards agreements concerning self-archiving. However, very few law journals have actually been included in Sherpa. A few have, but given as a percentage of what law journals are out there, it's very few. So I would not count on Sherpa actually being useful in this regard. You want to know that it's there, you can check it. But every sample that I checked, you click on the title and it says, nope, we got nothing for you. So don't be counting on them to be collecting this information for you. In the white paper that we did, we in fact, just to conceptualize this process, we did do a flow chart of the questions and answers and the routes to go in considering the copyright question. And one option, of course, is to include, if all else fails, you can post a draft version of the article. The publisher, of course, retains rights only to beginning to either the copy that you sent them or the copy that incorporated, their suggestions or their corrections. Any other version would be fair game. So if all else fails, you can create a version to post that did not violate the publisher's stringent requirements. We prefer not to do that. We want to put the final published version up there. But other people doing institutional repository do these pre-publication versions, and it is a legal possibility. Once you have the permission, you want to keep track of the permission. These can numbers into hundreds of pieces of paper. You don't want to have to keep files on this stuff. This is just going to get unwieldy. What we do is take advantage of an option that Digital Commons allows. We attach the permission to every article as an undisplayed supplemental material. This is, so you post the article as the main paper. It allows the option of to that record including supplemental material. And in this case, then you also can go back and decide whether that material should show to the public or not, or only display in administration mode. This is what we do with all the publication agreements. They're in undisplayed, administration mode only, supplemental material. We have also created an institutional repository community in our institutional repository where we will keep things like this lovely PowerPoint presentation, just stuff about, to help market it so that we can point faculty members, because this is where we, anytime we create something to show people what the value of an institutional repository is, this is where we will collect it. We'll, in fact, use the institutional repository to promote the institutional repository. And one of the categories that we have created for that is permissions category, where everything is an undisplayed supplemental document, but this is where we keep the global permissions, things that extend beyond the specific article. So when we get the global permission from, you know, a journal, we put it here so that we have it in a very convenient place. We know where to go in case we get another article from that journal again.
Okay, so you've got your institutional repository started and you're getting it off the ground, you got your faculty scholarship in, and you're ready to move a little bit beyond the basics. One of the things that we have found is that we were able to liaise with other administrative departments within the law school. And one of the examples I would give is that in 2003 we had a prominent speaker for graduation, the U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. So what we did was we worked with our PR department in the law school to capture items related to the event that we wanted to include in Digital Commons. And this is an example of what the record actually looked like. We used the transcript of the speech as the main document for the record, but then we captured the audio files. For example, we had the PR department had videoed the graduation speech, and we had it converted to a digital format so we could upload it to Digital Commons. We captured all the press releases, the newspaper articles, whatnot that we could include about it. And so it ended up making us have a new relationship with our public relations department, so much so that what they ended up doing was they liked Digital Commons so much that they subscribed to the RSS feed for items that we were adding, and now they include links in press releases. If a faculty member has put out new scholarship, they'll put a link to it in Digital Commons in their press releases. So we've got a sort of a new relationship with other departments that we had not had before the repository. The other thing I'd like to throw out to you is if you're considering doing this, but you're just not sure you want to commit to doing it as a single institution, is that you might consider doing it in a consortium environment. Regional organizations have done this. For example, Helen is a consortium of 10 academic libraries in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, and they are in fact using the Digital Commons platform to promote the dissemination of their faculty scholarship as a group. And if you decide to do this, there are many advantages of doing something as a super IR or a group IR. Of course, you would have increased buying power, and you could share your tech support and expertise. You could populate the repository much more quickly. And having items in there really promotes it among your faculty. The more you have in there, the more it sort of builds upon itself. I mean, it's a good way for smaller institutions to leverage their presence, their collective presence. And finally, you might be able to convince faculty that they could be more easily apprised of the latest scholarship at their peer institutions. The downside to joining in a consortium that you have to think about is that you could lose the institutional identity of your scholars. So you have to constantly be reminding them of what the trade-offs are if you decide to go with a consortial environment. Now, just in conclusion for the middle section here, we're all clear on what the goals of an IR are. We want to be sure to collect the information in one location and provide open access to the materials and increase the visibility of our institution, and most importantly, promoting the benefits of the IR as critical for its success. And you can use the IR to bring the world to the halls of your institution, and it will work very well for you, I promise. James and I, as I've mentioned, had written a white paper, and I've included the citation for that in this presentation, so if you take a look at this on the wiki later, you can go back and check that out. We're going to turn now to the other view from the trenches, which is the University of Maryland, and get a different...
You are good. You're even getting ready for you.
I'm getting ready for you. I'm a control freak. You guys would never do that, so...
Thank you very much. First of all, welcome to Maryland, and let me just say that this is the first opportunity that I've had, and that I think the school has had, to actually showcase what we've done with the Digital Commons. And I want to thank Carol and James very much for inviting me to participate in this presentation. It would never have occurred to me to try to do a presentation at CALI. Until they asked me to do this, and then they sent me their subtitle for the presentation, 2 Views from the Trenches, I got to thinking, what is this a dirty kind of a job? And what other word could I find, a synonym for trenches that might be a little bit more upbeat, perhaps? And I couldn't find anything. The words that I found were things like foxhole and ditch or gutter, which really just didn't convey to me the more elevated meaning that I think we were trying to find for the Digital Commons. So here's a little bit about the Maryland experience on climbing out of the trench. We made our decision actually somewhat the same way that you did in Georgia. We started with an SSRN working series papers, a research paper series in 2003 or 2004, and actually the library wasn't involved at that time. It was a law school project, and when the person who was doing it in the law school left, the library took it over. And from there on, we decided that it would really be worthwhile to investigate whether we could do an institutional repository. We still do have a research paper series in the Social Science Research Network, and we continue to add papers to that. But in 2004, we really put some more thought into how we could do a repository, and we investigated a variety of platforms, including things like DSpace, the open source platform, and we talked about doing something collaboratively with the other University System of Maryland libraries. But in the end, we decided that, number one, we really wanted to maintain some kind of control over what we were doing. Number two, we did not have the technical expertise here in the law school that we would require to implement an open source solution like DSpace. It may be free to get the software, but it is definitely not free in terms of the development work that you have to do. So I happened to attend a meeting in 2004 in Washington that was put on by SPARC, which is the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition. It's part of the Association of College and Research Libraries. And that meeting really served as the catalyst for us to begin thinking that the BePress, at that time it was still BePress solution, the Digital Commons, was the right one for us. So later that year, or the following spring, we had a faculty forum. We have faculty forums once a week here, and every once in a while the library is allowed to shine, to show off. And we did a presentation on what we could do in terms of facilitating faculty research. And right after we did that presentation, the dean said, "You got the money." I mean, we didn't do any of the kind of research that you did, and I'm really impressed at how much of the statistical information that you gathered. We just sort of flew by the seat of our pants and said, this is what we're going to do, and the dean said, "You've got the money, go ahead and do it." It did take us another year to work out the contract, and during that time, of course, BePress sold the Digital Commons to ProQuest, and then they bought it back from ProQuest, so we were working with BePress, then we were working with ProQuest, then we were working with BePress again. But we are finally, in 2005, no, let me think, 2005 maybe, we started with the Commons. So we wanted to figure out how we could sort of jumpstart the process And the first thing we did was take all the postings that we had made in Social Science Research Network and immediately upload them into the Commons. And that got us a small core of material that we could use. The next thing we did is every month here we get a list of new faculty publications. And I would scan that and I would write to each of those faculty members and say, I see you've published an article in XYZ and we'd like to post it in the Commons and put it into SSRN, and would you give it to us? And most of them said yes. So that was another way we started populating the Commons. And we have been doing for the last year and a half, with the help of Joyce Vickers over here and some other staff members of mine, to retrospectively convert everything that authors have written going back 15, 20, 30 years, depending on how long they've been here and how prolific they are. So we have sort of 3 channels that we're using to do that. I've also found that the best way to get content is by word of mouth. And as the Commons has grown and people have understood what we're doing and seen the benefits to themselves, they will tell their colleague, oh, I had a paper and I got X number of hits on it and so on. And so now people are much more interested in giving us the content rather than making us go after it and run after it. We also are very fortunate here, I think, to have a lot of personal contact with faculty, not just in the research department, but throughout the library. And so many of us, even though we are liaisons to various faculty members and liaisons to courses, and some of us, like in my department, I don't really do Blackboard and, because I'm doing all the technical things. I still work with a number of faculty. I'm not really their liaison, their official liaison, but they're the person that they ask for weird stuff sometimes. And so I have these personal contacts, and so do some other members of the staff. And then we have 2 research fellows who work in the research department that are working currently with faculty on various projects. And they will keep us informed about what Professor X is doing and say, he's going to have a paper in a few months. You might want to sort of keep track of what he's doing. So that's how we have a triple-barreled approach to what faculty are doing. We still do quite a bit of outreach, but it's gotten a little bit less, and it's certainly gotten a little bit easier over the last couple of years as people appreciate what the Commons has to offer. Now, there are a number of challenges. What happened here? Sorry, it just clicked out on me, which wasn't good. There are a number of challenges, I think, that we face in working with the repository. And the first one is explaining what is the repository. And I just like to use a very simple definition, something similar to what James and Carol used. I just say a digital collection capturing and preserving the intellectual output of a single or multi-university community. And that comes from a Spark paper that was presented a couple of years ago. The other challenge for us is really explaining the benefits of the repository. Authors want to know, why should I do it? Why should I bother? And we usually explain to them that will expose their work to a much larger audience and raise their profile in the academic community. And in addition, the repository serves as the vehicle to promote the institution's intellectual output, and it's a wonderful public relations tool. I was interested to hear that you said you use your development office uses RSS feeds, and I think that's something that we definitely will want to talk to them about, because we haven't thought of doing it in that way. Publishers and editors, particularly of law reviews, are often unfamiliar with the repository concept. And so we find that we have to explain to them what it is we're doing and why we're doing it, and tell them what kind of restrictions we could put on the content if they are absolutely adamant about not letting us post the paper. Soliciting content is still a challenge, and I know you talked about it quite a bit in your paper, how you go about doing it. I find that first of all, interacting with authors is a delicate matter, and it requires an awful lot of diplomacy. Some of our authors are very, very open and easy to approach, and others, you might want to not go near them with a 10-foot pole. So you just have to sort of gauge how these folks are going to react and deal with them accordingly. The biggest challenge for getting papers, I believe, is getting working papers. I still find that there's a great deal of resistance among authors to giving us something when it's still a work in progress or before it's been accepted for publication. Most of our authors are worried that if they give it to us prior to acceptance or while it's still being worked on, that it will be considered prior publication and a journal will not accept it, particularly when here there's an emphasis on getting it into the highest level ranked journal possible. So we still are working with our faculty to try to persuade them that preprint is allowed and that should not jeopardize their chances of getting an acceptance in a highly rated journal, but it is something, if you decide to implement a repository, you really need to be aware of. Every time I get a working paper, I'm just thrilled because I made another convert. We also deal a lot with copyright, and you've heard James talk about some of the challenges there. We haven't yet started storing our permissions in the repository, although I've thought about doing that. We have created a separate folder in each faculty member's folder, and where we're now keeping the permissions online because, I mean, we were getting stacks of paper like this. It was getting out of control. So that's good. I also think that faculty are very often, they really don't have any clue what they've agreed to. And they usually ask us to find out what it is that they've agreed to. Even if they retain their rights, they don't know they've retained them. Many of them are not familiar with the concept of open access. They've never heard of the Creative Commons licenses that are out there now. And in the law field, I think that whole concept is not as well known as it is in the social sciences generally, and especially in the sciences and in medicine. That's really, open access has come a long way. And I think we're going to hear more about it now that the Harvard faculty, law faculty, has voted in favor of posting everything immediately, and Berkeley has just set up a fund to pay for some of the publication fees. So I think that is going to help quite a bit. We routinely encourage our faculty to retain their copyright, but most of them don't really know, and so the library has taken on the role of middleman in that effort, and I think that's a good thing because that way we know for sure if we have the rights to it or not. We have taken the stand here at Maryland that we're not going to forbid somebody from self-archiving, and some of our faculty do it, but we would much prefer to mediate the archiving for them. We have some kind of a control over the quality of the material, although that was a bigger issue at the beginning than it is now. We certainly want to know what's going on with the copyright, and we can maintain a consistent format that so that everything in the repository has the same kind of look and feel. And if you let faculty do it on their own, you're going to get probably a mishmash of things. And finally, we have the challenge of updating the content. And I know I said that I'd really like to have working papers as the starting point for the repository content, knowing full well that that creates an additional workload for us because we try to keep track of when they've got a new version of something, a new edition, when it's finally been accepted, and that means we have to continually be updating what we've added to the repository. But I think it's worth the challenge to have to do that. Now, in our case, we've decided that we would put in a lot of other things other than just people's papers and scholarship. And we've created a number of communities, they call them, and series within communities in the Commons to reflect that content. We have one for our International and Comparative Law Colloquium papers. That was something that started in 2007. And we have another one for congressional testimony. That's a fairly recent addition that we've made to feature testimony of our faculty in the federal government in front of Congress. We've also have a number of special areas. We have some student scholarship that we're doing. We're featuring prize-winning student papers and those that have been published in journals. And we are featuring Maryland legal history. That's another one of our interests. There's a course that's being taught on that, and the students are required to write a seminar paper, and there are a number of faculty papers in that area. And then we have a student environmental law films, which are some films, and actually this was supposed to play, but apparently it's not. There was going to be a little moving picture here. We have a number of movies that were made by our environmental law clinic students last year. We also have started to take up a number of special features that BePress offers, one being the selected works. This is a fairly recent thing for us. We only began about 5 weeks ago to create a number of faculty pages, and we actually don't even have a link from our Commons page yet to this. I think we've only done about 4 or 5 faculty. But they're very excited. I got an email this morning from somebody who is just anxious to get his page going. So we hope to work on that this summer. We also offer Expresso. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that service. It is a service that you can use, that faculty can use to upload papers and submit them for publication. And we very highly recommend that. It cuts down on the workload and on the paperwork and makes the uploading of papers for submission much more efficient. And we offer EdiKit, which is a solution for publication, and I know our law review uses it to handle all the processes of publication from the submission of the manuscript to publication. So we are really sort of a full source BePress shop here, and we're very satisfied with the way that's working. I do, however, have a wish list of things that I would like to see happen in the future regarding the Commons and selected works. And I don't know, Carol and James may have some of the same ideas going forward. I would really like to make use of all the features as much as possible that the repository offers. We probably will start thinking about adding some additional content in terms of administrative material, maybe course materials that we haven't added in the past, and so not confine it strictly to scholarly material. We may use it to create an e-journal. We just are going to begin in the fall with the publication of a new journal on international law, and that would be a perfect vehicle to use for that publication. We have an alumni journal, which we're thinking about digitizing and putting up on the repository. I would really like to see much tighter integration between the digital commons and selected works. Now that I'm working on selected works much more heavily, I see where there could be a tighter connection between the two, and so that there wouldn't be as much duplication of effort. And it would be wonderful if we could do federated searching of the content in the commons with the other databases that we search in our online catalog. I don't know what's involved in that, but I think there are standards out there that if BePress supported those standards, our online system could also adapt to that. And I'd like to see a little bit more about usage statistics, not just how many downloads you've had, but making it easier to obtain some sort of more interesting and different kinds of statistics. Perhaps how many times somebody has downloaded something from a community, that kind of thing, which is at the moment a little bit difficult to do, and some export of documents and export of data. So just to say we're very happy with the Commons, and it's been a great product, and I think our faculty, those that are really aware of it, are very happy to have their work featured there. And I've learned a lot from what Carol and James said about highlighting the individuals and giving them a monthly report. That's something else we haven't done. And so that's the view from the Maryland trench. Are there any questions? Oh my goodness. All right, how about if I just stay here and moderate, and if you want to use the other microphone. All right, please, go ahead. We have 5 minutes.
A couple quick questions. It seems like you can customize the look and feel of your comments.
Absolutely.
Well, can you change the layout maybe?
Yes, you can. To a certain extent, you can. In fact, this is the new, our look is the new look, and we flipped our navigation bar from the left to the right. And we tried to make it look like, but not look identical to the law school's new web design.
And the second question that I have is about metadata. Do they take care of it, or do you have to set up your own? Is it Dublin Core?
That's there's a template that you fill out,
Okay.
and I think it's pretty much free text, and I don't think it's Dublin Core. But oh yes, you're here. Good.
I'm here. My name is Jean Gabriel. I'm president of BePress, and I'll answer the question about metadata.
You should perhaps come here so we can record the answer.
So we have just put in Dublin Core, extended Dublin Core. So it used to be that we supported 14 fields or 16 fields, and then we had a number of requests for fields beyond that. So now, I don't know what extended is, but it's an awful lot more than 16.
Yeah, great.
Yes.
We've been working off and on with our university repository on placing a variety of electronic, digital law school stuff in this repository. One of the things that we would like to do, and we've had sort of a stumbling block with it, we have a lot of archived webcasts that we've done of colloquia and workshops, and what has kept us from putting these into comments like this is the question of permissions. And I was wondering if you or the folks from Georgia have dealt with that.
Yes. We have, one of our faculty members has made a number of presentations, including she has something on YouTube, and we did get permission to put that into the repository. And the YouTube one is actually just a link to YouTube. We have not uploaded that. The other one, we did upload the media, and it's stored on the BePress servers.
But if you've done anything like, say you have a colloquium or a larger than a colloquium, a symposium, and you've had a dozen faculty members from around the country come in, all of whom have presented papers, and you've got the oral presentations.
We are getting permissions from those folks when they sign on with the conference.
How about retroactively? Are you going back?
We would if we had the presentations.
Okay.
But we are definitely doing that as part of the speakers agreements that we ask them to sign. Are there any other questions?
I just want to comment that idea of collecting, when we have a speaker community, collecting also the related newspaper articles and all that. So helpful. We're trying to dig back to something that happened in 1962, I believe it is.
Hard to do.
Yeah, we had Robert Kennedy spoke at the University of Georgia shortly before his assassination, and we're always getting requests for that speech. So I know exactly what you're talking about. We have to dig that. Where, what newspaper was that in? Where's that speech?
Well, if there are no more questions, thank you very much for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the CALI.
Really sorry about being Portland.
I think right now it's very limited to guest access to court scope. Yeah, I'm trying to work on Librarians. Yeah.
Four of us are going to